Imagine having your 21st birthday in the mirror room set of Enter the Dragon, watching Bruce Lee's live action. That was just the beginning of Andre Morgan's career. A renowned film and TV producer who started working at a young age for Raymond Chow in Golden Harvest. He's become one of the biggest links between East and West and produced some of our favorite movies and TV shows throughout the years. Today he will share great stories and life tips that he's gathered along the way. This is Andre Morgan for the Bruce Willow podcast. I'm so glad that Bay Logan linked us up. I'm always a little bit nervous because he gave me your WhatsApp and I was like, oh, you're going to give me his phone number? I mean, that's a little bit, that's a little bit on the private side. But I realized that some of you guys are not really connected, or you don't really like to go on Facebook and Instagram. What do you feel about social networking nowadays?
I feel about the same as people that were in their 60s when I was in my 20s and 30s felt about the idea of a mobile phone. It's what you grow up with is your limits of what you consider to be your privacy, right?
Yeah, exactly.
So for me, I have no problem with people that want to be on Instagram or want to be on Facebook or want to be on Snapchat. I understand it's an important part of society and interpersonal relationships today. On the other hand, I'm old school enough to still think that there is a line between my private life and my professional life. And I don't feel that in my line of business I need to share all the details of my life. I didn't elect to become a public figure.
Exactly.
On the other hand, I see where it's interesting is because we deal with this issue all the time as it relates to film and as it relates to what the humor is and what the social etiquette is for storytelling today. And obviously for young people, they have a much less of a sense of privacy or the need for privacy and much more of a sense of community and sharing, I think, which is, I suppose in the long run, is probably a good thing, with the one caveat that you live in societies with benign governments.
Yeah. And I was asking you this especially because in our line of work, I work as a stuntman, and I can see that nowadays a lot of the industry has gone towards this social network and numbers, the numbers that people like to consider in the celebrities. Are you feeling that in the industry they're leaning towards who has most likes, who has most comments and most engagement in social media, or we can still give credit to merit other than the footprint on the internet, for example?
Let's put it this way. I think it's certainly the dynamic is and has changed quite significantly in the last 5 or 10 years. But I look on it as being sort of the norm for any new media when it's first coming along. You know, the truth of it is, I remember when mobile phones first came into play, and there was great resistance at a lot of levels by senior people to being required to carry mobile phones. And then when mobile phones had texting on it, and in Asia we were adopting and using texting very early on, and I found that when I tried to get my colleagues in America to use it, they resisted. The same with snapshots and instant videos online, and on cell phones. But, as people get used to it, they will find a tolerance level in what is socially acceptable and certain things that are not socially acceptable. I think that's part of actually what's going on in society right now. It's certainly being acted out here in America by politicians or aspiring politicians and news commentators and everybody else getting in the mix.
Were you in the middle of production when this quarantine started?
No, I was preparing one picture in China that was supposed to start shooting this summer. We're in the process of rescheduling it because China's coming back on stream. We had several projects that we were in the early stages of preparing, still doing script development here in Hollywood, one with Warner Brothers for the relaunch of the Cannonball Run franchise, the old car, coast to coast car race movies that I made back in the 80s for Golden Harvest. And we were supposed to be bringing that up to go to production hopefully in the fall. We're now looking at what the options will be. In fact, they just published yesterday the rules for starting production again here in Los Angeles. But
Really?
I'm not sure that I would be in such a rush to start production here because if I believe the doctors and the World Health Organization, who I think know a lot more about it than Donald Trump, I would be very nervous about
You
starting
think?
production. Yeah, I haven't been drinking my Clorox or my Lysol lately either.
Yeah. Oh well. Well, let's get off the politics. And I heard you
Sure.
say in an interview something that was really fascinating. From Al Jazeera, they asked you, how would you like to be remembered? And you said something like, "I would like to be remembered as someone who gave more than he took out of the industry." Is there still anything that you haven't done yet in this line of work that you would say something like, "Okay, that I did not do yet, and I still want to do that."
Oh, of course. You've always got to have mountains to climb. There's always challenges out there, you know. Um, I look back over my career, having now, it's a horrible thought, spent the last 48 years of my life toiling in the fields of media. Um, there are still things that I would like to do.
Like
There are
what?
stories that I, there are stories that I still believe need to be told, that deserve to be told. Some that are scripts that we're working on right now, um, that I'm sure sooner or later we'll put them together. There's a project that I've worked on now for on and off for almost 10 years. I started on a script with a very dear friend of mine, an old friend of mine, John Milius, a screenwriter director. You know, you probably, your generation would know him for being the creator of Conan the Barbarian or
Yeah.
Red Dawn originally. John actually has a much longer career than that. He created Dirty Harry
Oh, yeah.
that launched Clint Eastwood. And he did Wind and the Lion with Sean Connery. In fact, he did a lot of the dialogue for movies for Sean Connery. And then he worked with Steven Spielberg on a number of Steven's pictures. He wrote Apocalypse Now for Francis Coppola. In fact, John is probably one of the most produced writers in Hollywood. And he and I did a movie many years ago now called Farewell to the King, which was the first film to shoot on location in Borneo. And he came to me 10 years ago and said, I want to direct one more movie. And I said, what's that? He said, I want to do Genghis Khan, but I
Ooh.
want to do Genghis Khan in a respectful way that positions Genghis Khan rightfully where he belongs is one of the most important historical characters in the history of the world. And so we spent 3 years working on the script. And as we got very close to finishing the script, unfortunately, John had a massive stroke
Oh.
that initially left him paralyzed from the neck down. The good news is he's recovered enough that he's mobile and he can still go hunting and skeet shooting, but he's lost his ability to speak and to write. And so obviously he's no longer directing. And I made him a promise several years ago that come hell or high water, I'll get the movie made. So I'm in the middle of working on that. And there are a couple of projects that I want to do as co-productions between China and America. Again, when the political climate changes, as I'm sure it will, we'll get those stories made. And so that's on the film side. There are some young filmmakers that I've gotten to know that I think have talent that I would like to help along the way with their careers, just as I have in the past with other filmmakers, and just as people mentored me when I was a young man. That's sort of part of the give back in the industry that I was talking about. And then there are obviously things that I'm interested in that have very little to do with making films or with the world of martial arts. Leave it to the next generation. There's plenty of young people that are anxious to roll up their sleeves and sort of move the benchmarks down the field. I think that's great. I think the one thing that's wonderful about our industry today is the more media there are in availability, the media that can broadcast or that can finance content, the more opportunities there are, the more voices there will be, and frankly, younger people will get a chance sooner. You don't have to apprentice for 20 years to get a chance to be a director or to be a stunt coordinator or to be an editor today,
Hmm.
because media has such a huge appetite. And at the same time, film schools have proliferated all over the world. And so, between all of the apps that are available on your cell phone or your laptop and taking a couple of courses online on YouTube, anyone can be making films or telling stories. And I think that's kind of cool. Um, you know, it certainly broadens the field and reduces the barriers to entry. And I think that's important. I think that's one of the ways we bring the world closer together. And hopefully, we make cultures aware of other cultures and their unique qualities and the similarities. Sounds all very intellectual, but I remember when I was young and we were doing the Kung Fu movies, how pleasantly surprised I was, and then ultimately how touched I was at how those films resonated outside of the Chinese speaking world. First, when we showed them here in the United States, the response from the minorities here, black and Hispanic, was absolutely phenomenal. Um, and then we had a similar sort of experience in Europe, and it had nothing to do with race. It was just people being excited to see something that was new, different, seemed a little bit exotic, but at the same time, the core values of the heroes were the same, and uh, the core bad things that the heavies and the bad guys did were the same thing as heavies and bad guys did in Hollywood movies or in movies made in England. And that's sort of part of that universal language of film, and that's part of what makes the world come together, I believe.
Yes, and those movies stand for principles. You know, when the martial artist or the hero either trains to get to a certain level or he goes against the powers that be. I mean, that's always very kindred to all societies, right, and all cultures. Do
Sure.
you have a? Are you more fond of working? And nobody's listening. I'm gonna give you a tough question. Do you prefer working with martial artists?
To be honest with you, I never really thought about it that way. You know, I guess because my entry point into the film industry, beyond being a young guy, a kid loving to go and see movies, my entry point was Golden Harvest in Hong Kong. So I learned the film business from the point of view of making Chinese language films, uh, a great number of which involved martial arts before martial arts were particularly well known in the West. Um, so I consider a number of the great film martial artists, whether it's Jackie Chan or Sammo Hung or the whole, what I consider to be the original Golden Harvest gang, uh, we all grew up together, so they're friends.
Mm.
And so for the next generation, like Bay Logan, when he showed up in Hong Kong, it was fun to watch him crashing around and learning a little bit about the industry. And likewise, the next generation, when Jet Li showed up, and then when Donnie Yen showed up, um, it's hard to be a grand old man in the industry when you're in your 30s. But the truth was, I had my 21st birthday on the Mirror Room set of Enter the Dragon. So to
Oh
say I
man.
got an early start is probably one of the great understatements of the 20th century film world. Um, I think I understand martial artists, and in that sense, I probably understand stuntmen and what's involved in that whole side of the business probably better than your average Hollywood producer or your um, average film director that hasn't come up through the ranks. You know, it certainly does um, color or inform a lot of my thought process about how to analyze um, the action in a movie and whether or not I think the movie's worth making, or is it simply action for action's sake. You
Because
know,
the way you and this is probably not the best term, but the way you fetched or went on to pick Chuck Norris later on, Sammo Hung. I mean, other than the connection that you obviously made in the Far East, something in me says that you might have enjoyed working with them because of their discipline, because of a lot of principles that they might have that are based on the martial arts and their way of doing stuff. But your story is amazing, actually. I mean, what? First of all, I want to
I'm not
know.
sure. No, I'm not sure that I agree with you. Let me put it to you a different way. I'm
Oh,
not a
okay.
martial artist. I certainly had many opportunities to become a martial artist.
Yeah, more than
I've been
anybody. Yeah.
very blessed to have a great number of really fine, not just martial artists, but let's just say combatants who are willing to share the secrets of their trade and profession with me. Um, whether it was American Special Forces or, you know, British SAS or whatever. Um, you learn a lot of interesting ways to hurt people, kill people, do whatever you want. Um, Sort of an interesting byproduct. What I actually think is true, I've been very fortunate to work with the best of the best. Not because I had taste, but because I was introduced by Bruce Lee and by Raymond Chow to the people that they consider to be the best.
Hmm.
And so that unfortunately spoiled me and gave me a very high expectation, both in terms of the quality of the martial arts. But the thing you learn about martial artists is I don't care how much natural talent they're born with. Like many other professions, you need the talent, but you also need the commitment and the willingness to spend the time to perfect your skills. And when you do spend the time and perfect your skills, you will be rewarded with success, just as Bruce was proving when he passed away, unfortunately, just as Jackie Chan never blinked an eye. He was always pushing the envelope, not as a martial artist, but as an actor who was willing to do all his own stunts, to take all the risks himself, back when nobody did that. Now we have Tom Cruise in America sort of emulating what Jackie actually was the pathfinder on 10 years before Tom. Not to take anything away from Tom Cruise, you
Of
understand,
course, of course.
but if you look at the history of things, that was one of the ways Jackie wanted to distinguish himself from Bruce Lee. And the truth is, Sammo was a great martial artist, but he was also a great Chinese opera star in the sense that he understood and loved Chinese opera. He loved the stories and he loved the theatricality of it. So he understood, actually long before Jackie, because I remember working with them all when we were in our early 20s, Sammo understood where to put the camera because his instincts on how to sell the drama of the situation. That's what drove Sammo to be not just a great actor and martial artist, but to be a really fine director. Um, and the same with Chuck Norris. You don't get to be 6-time world heavyweight karate champion unless you've got something really special, you know.
Hmm.
Um, but the same is true. I remember when Bruce called Kareem Jabbar to come out. Kareem was ranked number one basketball player in the world. Of course he was great. And because he was great, he hasn't become any less great as he's aged.
Hmm.
You know, he
Uh-huh.
had a
Yeah.
lot of style and he had a lot of class. Well, you can actually say that about most people that excel in their chosen profession, maybe with the exception of politicians. Um,
Yeah, but
but
actors,
certainly,
a lot of actors are a little, sometimes they're a little spoiled. That's why I was going to the
no,
martial artist side, but some of the martial artists are as
no,
well.
no, I'm not sure. No, I don't agree. I will tell you, yes, some actors are spoiled. Some of them become cautious because they get burned when they're young actors.
Hmm.
Some of them do
Yeah.
excellent. The ones that are actually really spoiled are the people that are insecure. I've been very blessed. I mean, I've known Arnold Schwarzenegger literally since he came to Hollywood. Arnold was one of the most humble people you ever met. We used to play tennis on Saturdays with my partner Al Ruddy before Arnold got married. It didn't matter how many times Arnold Schwarzenegger had been Mr. Universe. He was a very humble man. And to this day, Arnold, give you the shirt off his back. He's the real deal. Clint Eastwood is the real deal. They're not martial artists, they're movie stars, but they're great human beings. And what I'm suggesting to you is the people that excel by and large at martial artists aren't the bullies, because bullies tend to stop studying, stop perfecting once they think they're better than anybody else in their neighborhood. A real martial artist is only competing against himself, not anybody else. Well, you know what? That's kind of true of great film directors, great writers, great actors, great scientists, great, you name it. It's not unique to martial artists, but it's perhaps easier to see in athletes. And you know, if you're not a great athlete, you can't be a great martial artist. You got to be in shape, right?
Yep, exactly, exactly, man. Just experience oozing from these conversations. I love it. I love it. But I gotta know what. So you went on to an internship at Golden Harvest. And you were taking in the University of Kansas, if I'm not mistaken, you were taking Chinese studies. What got you into Chinese studies? Why Chinese studies?
I'll give you the short version. The short version was it was the high point of the Vietnam War. The Viet Cong had just launched the Tet Offensive, and in those days, if you didn't have a high grade average, your draft board would send you off to the army, and you would be in Vietnam within 6 months. And I had no desire to go to Vietnam. So I started studying Chinese in order to win a scholarship and stay in university. I fell in love with language, I fell in love with the culture, and then I became intrigued with the idea at the height of the Cold War that there were actually people in America that understood what was going on in China, kind of contrary to what the news organizations were telling us. And so I studied Chinese language, culture, and history. And then when the opportunity came to get a job in Hong Kong, literally the first job I was offered, thanks to one of my professors, was to go to work as an office boy at Golden Harvest for a year. Seemed like an idea. I didn't know what the movie industry was in Hong Kong. I didn't even know they had a movie industry. I thought the Chinese movie industry was in Taiwan. And the next thing I knew, I was in Hong Kong and I was an office boy, and my job was to translate Chinese subtitles into readable English. And I did such a stellar job on that. They said, well, you can now do the copywriting for our, pardon me, English language newspaper ads and then the synopsis. And before you knew it, I was all things English language, which was a great way to learn a lot more Chinese characters. And so I started learning Cantonese, since very few people were speaking Mandarin in Hong Kong in those days. And naturally, because Golden Harvest was a very small company, um, whenever they needed a translator or they needed somebody to look after the foreigners, I was it, since I was the only office boy and I was the only foreigner in the company. So within 6 weeks of joining the company, Raymond Chow said, "I want you to get some name cards made." I said, well, that sounds good. He said, "Yes, you need name cards in Hong Kong because we hand them out as a matter of introduction. You, I'm going to give you a Chinese name," and he wrote me out a nice Chinese name, which wasn't the same one that I already had. He said, "Mine's better." And he said, and we'll make you an assistant manager. So I thought, wow, that's not bad. Office boy and now assistant manager in 6 weeks. I said, assistant manager of what? He thought about it for a second. He said, the foreign department. So I thought, oh, that's good. I said, who's the manager of the foreign department? He looked at me and he smiled and he said, I am. So it was a two-man department, but there were only 20 people in Golden Harvest, right? And so then within another 3 weeks or 4 weeks, he said, I want you to go to the airport. Bruce Lee is coming back today from Rome, and Chuck Norris and Bob Wall will be arriving with him. Can you go to the airport and take them to the Hyatt Hotel? And I did. And then Bruce Lee said, who are you? And I said, I'm the assistant manager of the foreign department.
Yeah.
He looked at me and said, Golden Harvest has a foreign department? I said, yes. And he said, oh, who's the manager? I said, Raymond. He started laughing. He said, let's go and have coffee. So we went and had coffee the next day. And we hit it off. And as we say, I guess part of it was because we were all young and crazy, and Bruce was not a crazy movie star. He was a very, as everybody talks about him, you know, he was a very hyperactive young guy with a lot of dreams and a lot of ambitions and in a hurry to get there. So he was always looking to share ideas and bounce ideas. And that was the beginning of my, I didn't know it at the time, the next year and few months with Bruce Lee in the period from the last 2 weeks of shooting on Return of the Dragon, the scenes with Chuck in the Coliseum, the set we built in Golden Harvest Studios, that final fight scene, and then putting together Enter the Dragon, working with Bruce, being the line producer on Enter the Dragon, and being assigned to work on Game of Death, which we were shooting while we were waiting for everything to come together with Warner Brothers.
Okay. Everybody wants to know this, of course. How was he as a person? I'm talking about he. Obviously, he. All right.
He, Raymond Chow,
As
Jackie
well, I
Chan.
want to know. I want to know about Raymond Chow as well. But how was it?
Let's put
How
it
was it
this way.
hanging out with Bruce Lee? How was it hanging out with Bruce Lee?
It depended on what else was going on any given day.
Hmm.
Um, Bruce could be very mellow
Hmm.
and very philosophical. He could be very hyper. He had a temper. When he got angry, he could get very agitated. Um, but the truth of it was, just as quickly as he would get angry, it was like a thunderstorm. It would be over, you know. Um,
In the bipolar,
Basically, he was
in almost in
no,
the
no,
bipolar sense. Okay. Okay.
no. Look, as you know, producers are prone to exaggeration, and everybody likes to overtell stories.
Yeah.
Of course, I had my share of stories of Bruce losing his temper, but he was probably right to lose his temper. We work in a high pressure business, and when things don't go the way they're supposed to, you have a right to be irritated. When you have as much writing on the movies as Bruce had writing on the movies, he had every right to be aggravated. That didn't mean that he was always right or that him being aggravated was going to change things. And it wasn't a daily occurrence. On the other hand, I've seen Bruce stop things and say, wait a minute, that was rude. Let's be polite to these people. Let's give them face. Let's treat them like human beings. Don't just walk all over people. And he would go out of his way to be nice to the lowliest set runner or the lowliest assistant grip or camera assistant. So in that sense, he was very egalitarian.
Hmm.
He had a terrific sense of humor. He could be very, very generous, both in terms of his time and in terms of gifting people clothes, watches, whatever. Uh, In that sense, he was a very genuinely sweet human being. Now, the truth of it was, he could also be a very agitated and aggravated young movie star when he didn't like the way things were going. And yeah, he got angry enough that he would yell and scream. I never saw him lose his temper and punch someone. I saw him accept the challenge, the famous challenge on the set of Enter the Dragon,
In the tennis court, right?
on the tennis courts, but he wasn't angry. And I've already told the story too many times to tell it again, but the truth was, he consciously made a decision to teach the kid a lesson, but to not really hurt him. Okay? I've seen other actors, and I've seen other name actors, a lot less mature, actually take pleasure in hurting a stuntman or clipping an actor just because they were dickheads.
Yeah.
They should go nameless. You're in the industry, you know what happens. That's not who Bruce Lee was. And in fact, I share the same values that he had. Nothing was worse than to see that kind of nonsense on a set. It's wrong.
Yep. For sure.
Just point blank wrong. It has no place in the filming of movies, one way or the other. Doesn't matter if they're martial arts movies or they're ballet. You know, you've got to be respectful of your fellow workers. It's hard work. It's dangerous work. People do get hurt. So, in that sense, Bruce was terrific. A lot of fun and a lot of laughs. I didn't expect it to only last a year and 4 months. You know what I mean? People say, oh, you Enter the Dragon. It's hard for everybody to understand. When we made Enter the Dragon, we didn't see it as being the high point of his career. Enter the Dragon was supposed to be the sampler that we could show to Warner Brothers and to the Western world and say, hey, look what we can do. Give us a bit more money, give us a bit more time, and we'll make movies that'll knock your socks off. And as has already been reported, again, no great revelations, but it's true. Bruce's fantasy was he would make one movie a year in Hollywood and one movie a year in Asia. And he would help to nurture the Asian film industry and to foster the Asian Americans in Hollywood, telling bicultural stories at a time when that sounded almost unattainable. You know, we're talking about 1972, 1973, before Enter the Dragon,
Yeah.
and certainly a long way before Crazy Rich Asians and everything that came between. What none of us knew at the time was what an absolutely amazing role model he became for generations of young aspiring filmmakers, martial artists, actors, and non-white filmmakers all over the world that said, Jesus, if Bruce Lee can make it, I can make it. You know, and over the years as I've traveled the world, it's always very touching when I hear a story, whether it's about a kid coming out of the slums of Rio or a kid in South Africa growing up in apartheid, that all they saw was the idea that if Bruce Lee could beat up Chuck Norris, there was hope in the world.
Yeah.
Kind of
Exactly.
interesting. I mean, looking back at it now, it's 40 odd years ago.
I tried to think of someone who was more influential than him, and other than Genghis Khan, I really, I really have no clue. I really have no clue because even if you say, because in other sports or other athletes as well, it's kind of maybe Muhammad Ali, but there are not as many people who say I did what I did, or I started my career, or everything started with me watching Muhammad Ali. I mean, there's a lot of people saying that, obviously, but not as much as Bruce Lee. Bruce Lee started or ignited the passion for millions and millions of people. So it's really crazy the amount of influence that guy had. Did you have, I mean, when you spoke to him, whenever you were near him, did you have any idea, or was it present in your mind that maybe what you guys were doing at the time would be 40, 50 years in still revered, or were you like, okay, this is business as usual? Not a clue.
Look, first of all, we didn't sit there to make the movie going, oh, this is going to be a classic. This is going to win awards. This is, no. We were making a movie. We were, don't misunderstand me. We were very excited to be making a movie that was the first genuine Hollywood, Hong Kong
Co-production.
co-production in which the Chinese company, Golden Harvest, was an equal partner with Warner Brothers. And the star of that movie was going to be a Chinese leading man, Bruce Lee. It was a responsibility, but it wasn't a burden. You know, I remember when I was told you're going to be the line producer, um, and don't spend too much money. And by the way, just because you're the line producer on this movie doesn't mean you don't have to do all the other work that you have to do, i.e., keep translating the subtitles, keep doing all the other things, and because that was the nature of Golden Harvest. And of course, sitting and talking with Bruce about how to make the action scenes more exciting or how to make the set look better, because we didn't have a lot of money to make the movie. But as I've come to know now, I don't know, 80, 90 movies later, every movie's a challenge. Every movie has obligations, responsibilities. Every movie has hopes and aspirations. I've yet to meet anybody that says, we're going to make a really shit movie. Everybody starts out saying, this has got to be the best movie we can possibly make. And
Exactly.
absolutely, we get out there and we try, right? The one thing that was different maybe was because there was so much writing on this, I think that for Bruce, for the crew at Golden Harvest, for me, certainly for the other executives that were assigned to the project, we knew what a gamble it was for Golden Harvest to bet so much money on the idea of a co-production because the style of filmmaking was quite different in Hollywood and in Hong Kong in those early 1970s. And so what if the movie failed in both markets? What if it failed in Hollywood, so it failed in America? And what if it failed in Hong Kong because it wasn't a Chinese movie? So I know Bruce felt an obligation to make the action as good as possible, and we felt certainly it was our obligation to give him the time and give him the tools he needed. So after we wrapped shooting the Warner Brothers co-production version, we actually stayed on for another week shooting extra shots in the mirror room. And when we'd finished shooting, it was a lot of pretty cool stuff. And we called Warner's in Hollywood and said, listen, we've got all this footage we shot. We're going to process it and we'll send it back to you. And their initial reaction was, nah, we don't need it. We've got plenty of footage. And then some bright spark said, well, since you've shot it, why don't you go ahead and send it to us? And I can tell you, because I know the footage we shot, it enhanced the mirror room scene between Bruce and Sekian by a good 40%, because there was more to play with. So there were more angles and you could extend the tension and do all the things that made it a fitting grand finale, right?
Yeah. Yeah.
And so one of the hidden benefits that you learn as a young filmmaker is, hey, if you got an extra day and you got some extra film, go shoot it.
Mhm.
You can never have too much footage. You never know when you're going to need those cover shots, those pickup shots. You know,
Yeah.
just keep shooting.
Keep shooting.
Save it
Yeah.
all. Somewhere you're going to find a way to use it. And then when we saw the film, the first cut of the film, Bruce saw it in Hollywood. Um, and then they sent a copy out to us. And on the one hand, I think everybody was stunned at how good it looked, how rich it looked, but it looked like a Hollywood movie. It didn't look like a Hong Kong movie.
At
And so
all.
there were a couple of days of meetings and head scratching, going, well, what are we going to do? The action's cut wrong, you know. the Hollywood style of cutting action doesn't sell martial arts because it's all quick cuts and you don't see the sweep of the leg. You
Mhm.
don't see the 1, 2, 3, 5 punches in a row, blah, blah, blah. And so we spent several weeks in the cutting rooms with Bruce, myself, um, the editor and the assistant editor in Hong Kong, trying things and then sending those cuts back to Hollywood, some of which was incorporated. And as oftentimes happens, there was a negotiated understanding that I think actually got the best for both worlds. We ended up with a movie that actually, it's funny, I just ran the movie. I hadn't seen the movie in probably 12 years. And not for your interview today, but for something else. I thought, God, before I can answer any of those questions, I really need to rerun the movie and refresh
Hmm.
my memory. You know, it's a long time back to 1973, January. Um, I was pleasantly surprised at how well. I mean, the movie's a little corny with the chopsticks music and a few of the stereotypes,
Yeah,
but
yeah.
the story is simplistic. But the story was simplistic even by 1970 standards.
Mhm.
But the truth is, it's a good piece of film. It's entertaining. You sit there, you're watching it, you're in the story. Listen, I watch a lot of movies made 6 months ago, and you're not in the story. So to have one that's coming up to its 50th birthday here in a couple of years and to have it still hold up
'Cause it's real,
speaks
right?
volumes.
You feel
Yeah,
it's
it speaks
real.
volumes. Yeah,
It's so real. I mean, it's just there's no other. I mean, there are probably a lot of adjectives to go along with it, but real to me is the best one. And I've read this making of like the book from Robert Klaus. I read it like 10 times. I was just going through your part here, talking about you quite a bit because I guess you kind of contributed a lot to this book as well. And I just
Bob became a. The funny thing is, at the time we made the movie, I was the adversary because I was the white guy working for the Chinese
yeah,
studio.
for the other team
So
exactly.
I was the face and the mouth telling the white guys, no, that's not in the budget. No, that's not in the contract. And they could yell at me and tell me to go tell the Chinese this, that, and the other, because then they could go and hide in the hotel, and it was my job to diplomatically carry the message back. Um, the funny thing is, and what do you learn about the industry? The truth is, just as I can say, yes, we worked hard on Into the Dragon. Everybody wanted it to be successful. Certainly, I felt sad that Bruce didn't get to see
To
the
see.
fruits of his labor, if no more than just that one night standing with Fred Weintraub and Paul Heller on the other side of the street on Hollywood Boulevard, looking at the lines around the block for the opening night of Enter the Dragon,
Mm.
and being able, we looked at each other, and at that time, Fred and Paul hated me. I was Raymond Chow's mouthpiece. I
Yeah.
was the worst thing that had ever happened. But because I had just come from doing Bruce's funeral in Seattle, as a courtesy, they said, come with us tonight. And I remember standing across the street, and Paul and Fred were like over the moon because they had a piece of the profits. And I was standing there looking at this line of people around around the block in front of the Chinese. It's a big block up there. And thinking, I just wish Bruce Lee was standing here with me because it was the epitome of everything he had talked about. A movie where the audience was going to be seeing a non-white star, but they were going to see the movie because they'd heard good things about it. And of course, we watched them all filing in, and as one crowd was filing in, the crowd that was leaving the hall was coming out, and of course they were excited, and some of the guys were acting out scenes from the movie and leaping around it, early imitations of Jeet Kune Do and martial arts. And there's something terribly magic about the business when you have a film that connects like that. That was a special moment that I truly wish Bruce could have seen, or for that matter, that that Linda could have seen, or Brandon and Shannon were too young then, but I told them all about it many years later when they grew up. It was just a magical moment. It's like, whoa, that really works, right?
Wow, you've
The same thing when I had that same moment with a number of actors, stars on different movies. But I remember truly a lifetime later, 1990, whatever it was, 98, whenever we did martial law for CBS.
with Sammo.
And I had sold Les Moonves the idea of using my friend Sammo Hung to play this detective. And Les, to put it mildly, was skeptical because, as he told me, this guy looks like a fat Chinese waiter. And I was like, yeah, wait till you see how he moves. And
Yeah.
so with Stanley and I went off, and Les gave us the money, so we shot 12 minutes of footage. And about 3 days later, Les called me and he said, I'm going to give you the money. I want you to finish the episode. Come over and see me tomorrow. So I drove over to Fairfax to this CBS offices. He said, I want you to bring Sammo to Carnegie Hall for what in those days used to be called the upfronts. And every year the networks, over a 1 week period, ABC, NBC, and CBS, would show the advertising companies on Madison Avenue and the press all of their lineup of shows for the fall season, which would premiere in September. And it was the biggest day of the year but one for the TV industry. The biggest day of the year being the Emmys awards day. But this was the second most important day. And so I took Sammo and his wife and we flew to New York, and Sammo obviously spoke not so much English in those days. And I stayed backstage with him to just before it was time to go on. And I went back out and sat out front. And when Sammo walked out and they introduced him as the star of martial law, the audience went crazy.
Wow.
Because a lot of
Beautiful.
them already knew who Sammo was. But the fact that CBS was putting a Hong Kong Chinese actor as the lead in a primetime TV series was another first.
Wow. That,
And so sitting there that day and then going to the cocktail party afterwards, I was sort of, how you flash back in your mind thinking, wow, from 1972 and Bruce's dream to now 1978 or whatever it was, to Sammo's dream. And of course, the show went on to be very successful.
mhm.
You know, and yeah, I was thrilled when Chuck and Walker Texas Ranger ran as long as it did, but I never doubted that Chuck, when he did Walker, was going to be a smash hit. He was already a huge star in America, all over the world. With Sammo, he'd never been in an English language movie except for The Man from Hong Kong, where he played Thug A.
Yeah, with Jimmy Wang Yu, and I remember
Wong Yu
another guy who
and George
starred in that.
Lazenby.
And there's another guy who starred in that movie, a very handsome man called Andre Morgan. You know who he is?
I
and
know he is. He
and
was handsome. He's not handsome anymore, but I didn't star. I was a stuntman. That's when they made me a member of the Australian Stuntman's Association. So I'm now a triple hyphenate by then, right? I'm a producer, I'm a stuntman, and I'm a member of the Writers Guild. What more do you want?
no, I'm good. I'm good. I'm good.
It's a rags to riches story,
And
except it went backwards. As a producer, then I went downhill to being a stuntman, and then down to being a writer, so everybody could abuse me.
perfect. See, you can handle everything. I mean, that's what being a producer is, right? Filling in the gaps.
Absolutely.
Filling in the gaps.
Yeah.
You
Learning
said
a new trade in case you get to the point where you can't get hired for your old job. You know what they say about producers? You're only as good as your last movie. So it's good. Have another trade. You can be a stuntman, maybe be a writer.
yeah, fall down the stairs for me. Oh, that's perfect. Did it hurt you? Ah, yeah. Okay, let's do it a second time.
Go do it again.
do it again. And what about
Take two.
what about when Taekwondo strikes? The
another
handsome
epic,
priest.
actually, as a priest. That was my first starring role in Hong Kong,
I know, I know.
right?
Yeah.
And that was actually, I had my 21st birthday on the Mirror Room set of Enter the Dragon, and Bruce bought me a birthday cake, which was a surprise and very sweet. Um, that evening, I got on a plane and I flew to Korea to meet up the next day. Junri was flying in, and we were going to start prepping to do Taekwondo. And then they called me from Hong Kong and said, "Oh, you're not just going to be the producer, you're going to play the priest." I said, "What do you mean I'm going to play the priest?"
Yeah,
They
we
said,
need a
"Yeah, we
priest.
haven't found any actors in Hong Kong, and we figured we've already paid your airfare. Don't worry, we'll put you in makeup. We'll make you look older." And I was like, "Well, wait a minute. I thought I was the producer." And they said, "Yeah, yeah, you're going to do that, but you can also, you're there. You might as well be the priest." I said, "What do I have to do?" I never forget. Leonard Ho said, "You have to die, but make sure you do it well."
Oh man.
The early days, right?
The
You could be everything.
oh,
You be an actor, stuntman, editor, writer. Doesn't matter.
is that your favorite era, the 70s?
No, I've been very fortunate. I look at each new period, whether it's a new film
Mm-hmm.
or opening offices in another country. It's just another chapter.
You
Look,
can't be. You
being
can't.
in the no, being in the movie business is a gift.
Mhm.
It can be hard work. It can be long hours. Sometimes it can be dangerous. It sure can be frustrating a lot of the time. And the higher up you go, the more chances are it gets really frustrating. But the other side of it is, I don't know many businesses that give you the opportunity to work with so many talented people, so many creative people at every level. Whether today it's working with great martial artists or working with digital effects artists or working with, aspiring young screenwriters or Academy Award winning writers or meeting with government officials about how to build their film industry or how to rebuild their film industry or going on a location scout in Kenya or whatever. It's all a journey. It's all a great adventure. When Milius called me to do Genghis Khan, his opening line was, "Andre, I think it's time for us to have another adventure. How do you feel about Mongolia?" To
Whatever
be
you
honest,
say.
I don't. I hadn't even thought about Mongolia at that stage. Why? No, well, let's talk. You know, um,
Such
and
energy. That's
it's about
amazing.
it's energy, it's fun, and I think I don't know about today because you can't really look back. You can only keep going forward. I don't know if young people coming into the industry today have as much fun as we had. Um, Everybody talks about the obstacles and the glass ceilings and all the terrible things that go on, and I'm sure it's true. But on the other side of it, the one thing that I think the industry does do is it teaches you resilience, and it teaches you if you do think outside the box, you'll probably find a way to get it done if you really care enough. If you don't care if it's just a job and hey, you're punching the time clock and somebody says, "No, we're not making this movie this year," you go, "Oh, okay, we'll make another one." But if you're passionate about something, if you really care, you'll find a way to get it made, or somebody will help you get it made, or you'll pass it over to people that do have a passion for it. And I think that's still true, at least when I travel away from Hollywood, um, whether it's meeting young aspiring filmmakers in China um, or meeting young filmmakers in wherever I happen to be wandering around the world. They're full of energy, they're full of excitement, they have 9 million questions, and then they have all their own ideas of how they're going to do things better or different. And I think that's great. That was certainly the way we approached it. You know, I can tell you, when we were working on films, and it didn't matter whether you're talking about 1972 on Return of the Dragon or Enter the Dragon or Game of Death. It was all about, is this cool? Is this different? Will this be entertaining? Will they like it? I'm still having those same conversations today, talking about film scripts for young audiences in China. What are they going to want to see after being, quarantined for 2 months? What kind of movies are they going to be in the mood to see? And now
Any
the same question's being asked here in Hollywood. Well, what are we going to do when we go back to work? It isn't business as usual.
Do you have any rituals or habits that let you not go overboard on the work or get to too much of a workaholic state? Like, I'm thinking about the skills that gotten you where you are and how you can divide both professional life, which is a doozy, with your personal life.
The thing I learned a long time ago is actually when I was a young man and very earnest and hardworking at Golden Harvest, I was told if you can't go 96 hours without sleep, you'll never become a producer because you need to have that reservoir of energy to keep going when everybody else is dropping. And so I diligently learned how to stay awake and I learned all the tricks of the trade. I'm not sure that it sharpened my mind because I can tell you by around 64 hours you're starting to get numb. And so
Wow.
it's bullshit. 96 hours without sleep is painful. Um, but what I have discovered is sometimes you got to follow your instincts. It's not how hard you work, it's how smart you work.
Oh yeah.
It's listening to your own instincts. And then I find, and the thing I tell everybody I work with is, yeah, let's listen to each other's opinions, but then let's go out and listen to young people. Let's listen to the audience, what they like and what they don't like. That way we don't just make things for old people that don't go to movies.
That cuts corners, right?
Yeah, it's very difficult in Hollywood. As you move up the food chain, you start to think of yourself as having a feel for the marketplace, a feel for the
Hmm.
audience. And then you turn around and you're 50, and 50-year-olds don't go to the movies. 50-year-olds sit at home and watch Netflix, Hulu, and HBO and have opinions. Young people go to movies. Somebody asked me the other day, Variety or somebody, what is the future of the cinema industry? Is it dead? I said, no, it's not dead. Young people will always want to get out of the house to get away from their parents. And you're going to want to hang out with other people that are doing similar things, right? Not the same as hanging out with their parents at home, not the same as being with um, adults doing what adults want. Now, those people are still going to have that attitude just the same as when I was young.
Hmm.
Now, maybe COVID, because of the way it seems to get people over the age of 40 or 50 or 60 um, with a greater number, maybe what few old people used to go to the cinema will stop going. But I don't believe young people will stop going to the cinema. So maybe we have to start being more thoughtful about what we're making for young people, not just making Marvel comics,
Yeah. Yeah. Oh yeah.
you know. And that's nothing, I'm not putting down Marvel comics, I'm all in
No, no.
favor of them.
Yeah, I got it. Yeah.
I'm in favor of Marvel comics just the same as I'm in favor of martial arts movies,
Hmm.
gangster movies, westerns, swordplay movies, comedies, stories about minorities, stories about majorities, stories about everything.
If you sit
But I
down to
think,
watch a movie, which movie are you gonna watch? What are your and I don't mean movies that you might have had any connection with. Which movies do you like personally?
well, look, let's put it this way, because movie going to me is part still pleasure and part it's work. So, as my poor long suffering wife has learned, I try and see just about everything that comes out
Mm.
because I want to be aware of what young film directors are doing, what young actors are doing. And also, it's kind of interesting for me to see a movie and then read the reviews and see the results to see how out of sync the critics really are with the taste of young moviegoers. or that young moviegoers respond to things that, gosh, are as old as the hills. It's not always about, it has to be, some bizarre angle. We shot the movie entirely upside down in sepia and 972 frames per flashing second because that was giving it a reality that only could be achieved with blah, blah, blah.
Hmm.
No,
Hmm.
I find the truth is people still love to go to the movies and they love movies that they can relate to, where
The
the
story
emotions
is
are honest,
everything, right?
the people are honest, the stories they can relate to because it reminds them of their everyday life or it takes them out of their everyday life. They like action movies, they like comedies, they like to cry. In a perfect world, they like to be able to do all three of the same movie. Um, but that's not always possible, right?
Hmm. I believe that a lot of the way you think and your open mindedness is for sure, and like you said in an interview, ignorance is bliss, because then you believe you can achieve everything. That open mindedness and not falling into into one of the feelings that I have a lot of the times. We have this word in Portuguese, it's saudosista. And I'm saying this word in Portuguese because I never found any similar word in English, which means one of those people that really are nostalgic to the point of everything that was old or that was made like 20 or 30 or 40 years ago, it's better than what is done now. And I have a little bit of that. I still get goosebumps whenever I see not only Enter the Dragon, but all the 70s and a lot of the 80s movies. And I am one of those guys that say, oh, music nowadays, crap. Oh, films nowadays, crap. I'm one of those guys. I got to admit. I got to admit. And
Now,
sometimes I
see,
love
Bruno,
working. Yeah.
that's you, as hopefully as you get older, you will shed that
I hope so.
because no, it's very simple to my way.
Mm.
I grew up, fortunately, as color movies were coming in and black and white was fading away. And so I saw most black and white movies on TV as a kid without appreciating what I was seeing, just seeing them because that's what they put on TV in the afternoons in America, old movies. And then there was, without a doubt, a period in the late 60s and the early 70s when the next generation of, you know, young filmmakers, Francis Coppola, Steven Spielberg, George Lucas, John Milius, all of those, the young, if you will, the young cowboys of Hollywood came in, turned Dennis Hopper. They all came in and they turned Hollywood on its ear. They started making movies that were relevant, taking the best from the European schools of filmmaking, combining it and coming up with their own styles. And that was part of the wave that I got swept up in as a young filmmaker in Hong Kong because we were buying films and distributing films and we were selling films. There was a community and it was all very exciting because we felt like we were reinventing what had been written off. Film was declared dead. TV had killed it by 1972, 73. And then along came a couple of movies. Along came Jaws, Spielberg. Along came The Godfather, Francis, and my partner Al Ruddy. Al and I were partnered for a long, long time.
Yeah, Ruddy
Um,
Morgan organization. Yeah.
yeah,
Mm.
and a whole new generation was born, and I was part of that generation that came out of that. We didn't know it at the time. We were just out there doing it, but anything was possible. And then that generation launched the Stallones and launched the Schwarzeneggers and the Bruce Willises. You know, it's funny. I just saw an interview with Sly the other day, and I'd forgotten. The first time I met Sylvester Stallone was at a party with John Avildsen, and they were leaving the next day to go to Philadelphia to start shooting a script that this guy had written called Rocky.
Wow.
And he said to me, "And I'm not signing the contract till the film's over because they want to kick me off the film." That was like my second, third trip to Hollywood. I was like, "Oh, that's good." What do I know? I'm from Hong Kong. Um, so, as you get older, you ask me what's my favorite. There are movies I love from every generation. It doesn't matter if I go back and I'm running Heaven knows Mr. Allison, or I'm running Maltese Falcon, or I'm running
Oh.
Jaws, or running Chinatown.
Ooh.
Right? I ran Chinatown a couple of months ago just because I didn't remember a couple of the, I couldn't remember a couple of the things of how they got into the story. And I remember when I saw the movie originally, I was blown away. And then I met Roman with Bruce Lee at lunch in Hong Kong. And I was like, wow, the Roman Polanski.
Hmm.
Um, so you appreciate films. And then as you go on through, there's films from every generation. I used to do these interviews. I used to say, yeah, I'm the I'm the living Forrest Gump, because I was just wandering through Asia and this shit kept happening around me. I
That's
wasn't doing anything. I was just reaching into the bowl of cherries, and another day would go by and something else would happen.
that's a great
Uh,
analogy. Yeah, yeah, yeah. Great
yeah,
analogy. Everything just kind of, but you had to
just kept
be.
happening.
But there was something about yourself. I mean, were you? I can tell that you are in a way because a lot of your experience comes from the big deal of networking that you've done over the years. Were you like very how should I say this? Were you shy at first, or were you already outgoing so that these people would keep on giving you these great opportunities?
Let's put it this way. I've been accused of a lot of things. I've never been accused of being shy.
Exactly.
You know,
Exactly. That
I
was
moved
what I was
to
getting at.
I moved to Hong Kong when I was 20. I knew absolutely nobody in Hong Kong. I had spoken to Raymond Chow for 5 minutes on a telephone. Um, so I guess jumping off or jumping out of airplanes without parachutes uh,
Is a good metaphor.
was kind of okay as far as I was concerned. I grew up as a military brat, so we moved all the time.
Hmm.
But that said, I think, and I try to do it to this day, is it's okay to be out there and to be angular and to have a point of view. But you got to understand that also you still have to remain humble. I didn't do those things. I was there and I helped those things to happen. I didn't make Bruce Lee Bruce Lee. No. Bruce Lee was a force in nature. Raymond Chow was a force in nature. And a lot of the other very talented people, doesn't matter whether it was John Milius or Bob Mitchum or Hal Needham or Jackie Chan. Of course, because they had talent. And hopefully I helped them to achieve things that they wanted to achieve at the time. And I was amply rewarded for it. So I've never felt any less equal than any of them. But I also have never been particularly shy about sharing my point of view on things.
Mhm.
The worst that happens, you say, I don't agree. Okay, don't agree. There's a wonderful old rule. When I was running production in Golden Harvest, we used to have an intern program. I used to give, once a year, we'd send letters to all the film schools and say, if you have any Hong Kong students returning home and they'd like to come to work in the film industry, send us a note. We're hiring at Golden Harvest. And a lot of very talented people came through that program over the years, and went on to become other generations of filmmakers in Hong Kong. By then, they looked up at me because I was the guy that was the cutting edge of Golden Harvest in Hollywood. I'd set up Golden Communications, and we were doing co-productions with everybody under the sun. And I, I said I'd say to them every year, listen, your parents have just spent a lot of money putting you through an American university for 4 years. We're now going to spend the next 3 months teaching you how much money your parents have wasted on you, because there's very little that you can't learn about basic filmmaking in 3 months. You're going to spend some time working on a set so you see how a set works. Keep your mouth shut, keep your eyes and ears open, and do exactly what you're told. Try not to stand under a falling light. Then you're going to work in the office, and you're going to learn how to budget. You're going to learn how to read a budget. Because the takeaway that I got from learning how to read budgets, There was no such thing as a really bad film. There were just films that were too expensive. If we'd have made them for half the price, they would have still been profitable. So the real art of being a producer is figuring out what your threshold is where you're not really risking a lot. You know you get your money back, but you're empowering the filmmakers with enough extra money that they can try and push the envelope enough to make it into something special. And I think that is important. It's not about if you have all the money in the world. Because if you have all the money in the world, why are you even bothering to make a movie,
Yeah.
right?
Hmm. Hmm.
And the second lesson as a producer, and it's probably more pertinent today than ever, because there are not an awful lot of working producers anymore. And it goes to the heart of what you were saying about bullies. And the lesson that I learned by observation more than anything, but with the benefit of being able to bounce ideas off of Raymond Chow, because he was certainly much wiser than I will ever be. And I came to the conclusion at a certain point we were being hijacked by a director who kept rewriting a script and demanding more money on the theory that we'd already paid him so much we had to keep going. And the lesson I took away from that as a producer was, and I tell this to all film school students in the producers program, be humble, be nice. Never hire anyone you're afraid to fire. Because if you're afraid to fire them, they're going to be running the show, not you.
Great, great advice. Great advice. Wow. Sir,
Okay?
this is not a conversation. This is a workshop. I'm learning so much, especially about mindset. I believe that mindset is what it's what people should mold into becoming what they eventually want to become. So
Sure.
I would really,
The
yeah.
last lesson then for the day. Those same young film students coming back, we'd always give them a couple of scripts to read.
Hmm.
Yes. They've been trained to do this. That's what you do in film school. You read scripts, you write synopses, you write critiques, you write all this stuff. I said, okay, well, you read the scripts, write up the synopsis, and then write up your critique of how to make it better. And they'd all go off, come back with the little prizes done, the beautiful essays, and ripping it to shreds, and blah, 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 blah. And then for those that liked the film, the intern program at Golden Harvest, they would stay on it. At the end of 6 months, I would re-interview them and we'd talk about which part of the business they wanted to be in, distribution, marketing, production, whatever they wanted to do, because we needed people in all of those fields. And what we really needed were young bilingual people, because that was the crossing point when the British were leaving Hong Kong and all sorts of exciting things were happening. And or the British were preparing to leave Hong Kong, I should say. And for those that decided they wanted to go into the producing program and train up to be producers, you say, right now we're working on this script and this script. I want you to get your notes together because we're a director. And Golden Harvest, one of the great things that Raymond Chow and Leonard Ho taught me in my first 6 months at the studio, they say to me, listen, we were trained the hard way back in the 50s and the 60s. Assume that if we don't say something, you're doing it right. We don't need to praise you because that's why you're here. You're supposed to do it right. So we're going to stay focused on the things you do wrong, and we're going to keep telling you how to fix those things until we don't have to criticize you, at which point you'll know you're doing those things right. Oh, it's very logical. Okay. Um, I've never been one that needed a lot of praise. So with my young film aspiring students, now trainee producers, they'd all get their scripts, and you'd never put two of them, you'd only put one in with the writer and the director. And invariably what they would do in their first couple of meetings, where they would start explaining to the writer and the director, this is how you need to write this scene, and they would start writing scenes for the director. And directors, kind of patient people, if they're good directors, they'd smile, nod, and say, well, we'll go off and think about it. And then I would wait until the director and the writer left and say to the young producing trainee, look, I know you worked very hard to be ready for today, but I want you to go home tonight and decide if you want to become a screenwriter. I'll put you in the screenwriter program. If you're going to be in the producer's program, don't sit there telling a writer how to write a scene. You want to be a writer, go write. You want to be a producer, look how to encourage a writer, look how to nurture a director, how to help them realize what it is they're trying to put on the page. And if you don't like doing that, go be a writer, go be a director, but you're not being a producer. You need those skill sets. You need to be able to write, just like you need to be able to edit, and you need to know how to handle a camera or be a stunt guy or whatever.
Hmm.
You need to know a little bit about all these things to be an effective producer. But if you think you're such a great writer, maybe you ought to go be a writer,
Yeah.
you know.
Yeah.
And I honestly do believe that. I used to say it to producers who work for me. And I'd walk on the set and they'd be standing next to the director, telling the director where to put the camera. Why am I paying a director? If you want to direct, here, fire the director. I'll split the salary with you.
Ooh, we got a few of those here in Portugal. I've come across a few guys that I was really wondering who was directing the movie. It was like, why is that guy here if you're doing all the work? But you can't say anything
Or you
because
think
they're
you're
the
doing the work.
yeah, I mean, because they're the executive producer. So it's like I can't say anything. Nobody says
Yeah,
anything, but everybody's thinking that. And what a disregard for the whole crew that is, and how that is the surefire way to get people less motivated about the movie. And guess
sure.
what? All those movies sucked anyway.
But that's also about EQ. It's about personal relationships and
Hmm.
human resources and how to motivate people, you know, as opposed to did you do a good job directing the movie or did you do a good job producing the movie? Every movie's different. You got to understand the needs of your director, the needs of your financiers, the situation, the geopolitical situation in which you're shooting the movie,
Hmm.
the time constraints, who's the market for this. There's a lot of equations. I didn't do that when I first got in the business. Here we got this amount of money. Let's go shoot. How many days of fighting are we shooting? How many days of action? What do you mean the action should inform the character? The action should advance the plot. What moron came up with that line? But the older you get, the more you realize, actually, that's not a bad idea. We ought to really try doing these things.
Hmm.
And then lo and behold, before you see it, Sammo's explaining to Donnie Yen, listen, if you want to make Yip Man into a really good movie, and Donnie's going, oh, and then so you sort of go, that's amazing. Life does go on, right?
And you were the one to convince Jet Li that he could be an actor for Warlords, right? He said, "I'm a
That
martial
I
artist. I'm
love.
not a." But why? Why was he so self-conscious about his acting after stuff like Lethal Weapon 4? And he was great in that. I mean, he had acting skills.
Of course he had, if he didn't have acting skills, Peter Chan wouldn't have said, hey,
Yeah,
you think we can get Jet Li to do it? And you look at this
yeah.
and you say, yeah, he can do that.
How did you convince him?
Um, I'm laughing now, bless his heart. Jet's actually a sweetheart of a guy. Jet was in Jet was in Shanghai. Peter and I were in Hollywood. And Peter and I were arguing about the script, up one side, down the other, back. We had slightly different visions for the movie. But this was early stages before we got it all put together. And say, well, we're going to need a bigger budget. I want to do this, and you want to do that. And if we want to do all this stuff, to push the envelope, it's going to take money. And if it takes money, we got to put bigger stars in the movie. Peter's recounted all of this in his biography. I gather I haven't bothered to read the whole biography in Chinese, but I'm told he recounts it in great detail as to how I fucked his life up for a year by making him make a very expensive movie. Um, but it was okay because we were pushing the envelope in China that year with the movie. And we thought it would be interesting to do a real gritty, big period action piece before anybody was doing that in China. And we were all learning the China market. So we came to the conclusion there was only one actor in the world that could play the lead. And it was Jet Li, because he was an international star, because he had been in movies in America and he was in movies in Europe and they knew him in Japan. And so we'd get foreign sales and that would add to the budget supporting a larger budget because you couldn't support that big a budget for a Chinese movie that was only going to play in China and Hong Kong. So I called Jet's lawyer, who happened to be one of my lawyers here in Hollywood, and I said, hey, we got a movie we want to talk to Jet about. And where is he? And Jake Bloom, who's Arnold Schwarzenegger and Sly's lawyer in those days, and Ruddy Morgan's lawyer, he said, well, Jet's in Shanghai. Why? I said, well, we don't have a script because we're writing it, but I've got the money to make the movie, and Peter Chan and I'd love to fly in and see Jet and talk to him about it. And Jake knew Peter. Peter was back and forth between Hong Kong and here. And he said, well, why don't I call Jet? Well, Jet was so excited because Peter Chan, bless his heart, was considered one of the major directors of Hong Kong, even in those days. This is early days of Peter. This is after He's a Woman, She's a Man, and just after we'd finished doing Perhaps Love. And so Jake called and said, hey, Peter Chan and Andre Morgan want to fly over and see you. And Jet was like blown away. They're going to fly here to see me? I'm a martial artist. So we got on the plane, we flew to Shanghai, we met him at the Portman Hotel. And Peter was like, well, how do we do this? Do we just tell him the story? I said, yeah, tell him the story and we'll answer his questions. So we tell him a brief version of the story of Warlords, and Jet's sitting there and he's looking at us. And he says, oh, that's a really good story. So which part do you want me to play? We said, well, we want you to play the lead. He says, you want me to play the lead, but there's no martial arts in the movie. So I said, don't worry, we'll have a martial arts fight somewhere in there for you, Jet. But no. Peter says, you can do it. I believe in you as an actor. And Jet looked at him and looked at me and he says, you guys are trying to hire me as an actor? This is how humble Jet was. I said, but I'm a martial artist. I'm not an actor, I'm a martial artist. And Peter said, well, I think I can get the performance out of you. And I looked at Jet and I said, that's good enough for me. I trust my director. I'm a producer. If he says he can get it out of you, sit back and do what he says.
Wow.
We got through the movie. And Jet went off to do, what did he do coming off that? Oh, I know. He went on to a movie with Jackie Chan for Rob Minkoff and Rafaela de Lorenzo. I forgot what it's called.
Kingdoms, Kingdoms?
Yeah, something like that. It was this
Yeah.
martial weird kind of a. Yun Wo Ping was the martial arts choreographer. Rob Minkoff was directing. They were shooting just as literally as we wrapped. I released Jet a day early to go down and meet up with Jackie. And we got the movie done, and so we showed it to Jet because we needed to do some looping. And he was like stunned. And then, of course, the movie went out. It did good business. It had very good business. And he got great reviews, and he got nominated for Best Actor in Hong Kong for the Hong Kong Film Awards, which is like,
What do you know?
was the most prestigious awards in Asia at the time. And Andy Lau, who co-starred with Jet, got nominated for Best Supporting Actor that year in Warlords. But there was another movie that Peter and I had produced that year called The Protégé that Andy Lau had starred in. So Andy got nominated twice. He got nominated as Best Actor for Protégé, and he got nominated as Best Supporting Actor for Warlords. So he was head-to-head in the voting for Best Actor, and then we knew he was a slam dunk for Best Supporting Actor.
Yeah.
Now we go into the awards show, and we're all sitting in a nice little row, and there's Peter Chan, and there's me, and there's Jet, and there's Andy Lau on the other side, and there's all down this whole center row, because we were nominated for 12, 13 awards that year for Warlords, and we were nominated for 5 or 6 for Protégé. So we kind of knew it was going to be an evening for Peter Chan and I. Oh, and sitting in the row in front of us was Raymond Chow, who was getting his Life Achievement Award, which was really great. It was a magical evening, right? And
So how much drunk did you get in that
No,
evening?
not at all. Afterwards, yes, but not before.
After
It was a great evening. A great evening. Uh,
Mm.
One of the
Wow.
great parties of all time with
Mm.
Jackie Chan and
Wow.
anyway.
Wow.
So we're sitting there, and they say, and the best actor nominees are Andy Lau, round of applause, Jet Li, round of applause. And they go on down. And Peter Chan's wife was actually presenting the award. And she's up on the stage. And she says, and the winner is, and she says, Jet Li. We're all applauding. And Andy Lau's applauding. And Jet's applauding. And Jet leans over to congratulate Andy Lau. And Andy
He
Lau's
didn't
looking
get.
at me. We're all going, what are you doing? And he says, no, you won. And he was like stunned.
Wow.
And he got up to go up and get the award. And the truth of it was, what he said the night was true. He had no idea he was going to win.
Wow. I
Peter and
got.
I never doubted in month of Sundays that he wouldn't win. And Andy won for Best Supporting Actor in Protege.
Wow.
Yeah, Protege.
Wow. Such
Amazing, huh?
such humbleness in Jet Li,
Yeah.
and such, such vision,
But you see,
such
the
vision
people in
on your
Hong Kong,
behalf. Mm.
no, we were very fortunate. We had good material, we had good teams. But those people, that's the way they really are. They're very
Mm.
humble people to this day. You don't put
Mm.
on airs.
Mm.
You know,
Yeah.
Peter Chan, we see each other socially. We'll do something together someday again. You know, Jet's sort of retired now, but he's great. And Andy is still charging ahead, making movies. It's like Donnie Yen has come into his own. You know, each one gets their turn. Um, it was just a magical time to be in the industry, to be in Hong Kong in the 70s and the 80s, to be in Hollywood in the 80s and the 90s, and to be in China in the first 2 decades of the 20th century was just magical because it was like having a ringside seat
Yeah.
at three major explosions in the film industry, in the media, you know. And to be honest with you, as much as it's tough going through it right now with COVID-19 and all the death and all the suffering,
Mm.
we'll come out of this. We'll be on the other side of it. Just as I remember in 2003 being in Beijing and being told by a minister, Morgan, you really should go home now. And I looked at him and he said, go back to America now. 3 days later, they closed Beijing for SARS.
Oh, yeah.
They closed the whole country,
I didn't
and the
remember
country
that.
stayed closed
Mm.
till June.
Oh.
They came out the other side. I went back to China that summer, and everybody was picking up the pieces, trying to figure out where we go. And we realized that it was important, talking to the film bureau, that we make a gesture that somehow we get an international film team to come in and do a film to signal to the rest of the world it's safe. Come on over. And I convinced Merchant and Ivory, James Ivory and Ishmael Merchant, who had won a ton of awards for some amazing movies, um, several Oscars, Room with a View. They were getting ready to do The White Countess, which was a Shanghai story.
With Ralph Fiennes? No.
Ray Fiennes,
Yeah, yeah,
yeah,
Ralph Fiennes.
Ray Fiennes, and Chris Doyle was the cinematographer on it. And we got him to come over. We arranged for some of the financing out of Shanghai and China. And that was the first foreign film to shoot in China. We were able to show Hollywood, hey, Ishmael Merchant, James Ivory, they're not young people.
It's
They came to
okay.
China.
It's okay.
It's
Yeah.
okay.
It's
And
okay.
that sort of opened the gates again and got it going.
Yeah, that's
And I'm
probably
sure that the same thing will have to happen
yeah.
for COVID-19.
Hmm.
It's a
I
different
believe
world,
so.
but same, those kind of things.
I believe also I believe that we should hygienize our habits in a way, but I believe that people or the human being will forget very fast. It's like in a year from
Human
now,
nature.
yeah,
Human nature.
yeah,
Listen,
human nature.
it sounds awful to say. I remember, again, as a younger filmmaker, when HIV was the mystery disease.
Oh yeah, in the early '90s and yeah,
And
early
HIV,
'80s,
when,
late '80s.
yeah, all the rumors, agents dropping dead in Hollywood,
Wow.
uh, and actors and agents, and oh my God, and then, oh, it's a communicable disease. And the same thing that I'm reading in a lot of the suggestions on how to make the set safer now. We went through the same moral dilemmas.
Mhm.
Well, how can you have actors and actresses kissing? How can you, we got through it.
Mhm.
Human beings are one, creative, two, ingenious, and three, we have a strong sense of self preservation. And once we figured it out, it goes in the trace memory, and we go to short term memory to get on with life.
Mhm.
That's what allows us to survive. Otherwise, we're deer caught in the headlights. That I
Comes to,
think is still true today.
it comes to show that being a producer is also being a psychologist. Exactly.
Being an observer of human nature, I think
Exactly.
helps. Man,
Exactly.
look,
Exactly.
things
Um,
things happen all the time. Shit happens when you make movies.
yeah, exactly. Andre, sir, thank you so much for this.
Not at all.
I would just would really love you to humor me. I know you've counted this story, you've told this story many times, but the story of the extra challenging Bruce, I know that a lot of our Portuguese and Brazilian audience would love to know the details. So if we could end
Why don't you
on
just read it? Why don't you just read it out of Bob Klaus's book on the
ah
making of Enter the
because it's
Dragon?
not the same thing as being told by you. Come on.
No, I mean honestly, Bruno, the truth of it is it's been told and retold, and everybody embellishes it in their own way because of how they
Of
remember it,
course,
right?
yeah, 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 yeah.
I would rather tell you a different story.
Oh, sure, yeah. Give me a cool story that you find that you haven't told enough. Yeah, cool.
Okay.
Yeah.
There's a vicious rumor that's
Hmm.
made its way around Hollywood for many years,
Hmm.
thanks to one documentary, about the symbolism of Game of Death. You
Yes.
know, why did Bruce Lee wear a yellow outfit with black stripes um, when he was climbing up the tower? And
Hmm.
what was the symbolism? And was he really wearing that yellow jumpsuit, showing that he was representing all Asians in their journey to equality with white men? Blah 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 blah. Right?
Oh, really?
I think.
Okay, that's
Yeah,
far
I
fetched.
was stunned. No, no, I was actually stunned to hear this on a documentary on HBO a couple of years ago, and I was like, "Wow, that's really trippy." The
Yeah.
reason it's really trippy is because I was actually on the set standing with Bruce the day that the wardrobe guy, lady, actually it was the wardrobe guy and his assistant, came shuffling up and said to Bruce, because he was directing Game of Death, um, hey, for the scene where you fight inside the temple, because we were going to do the different stages, right? We
Hmm.
were going to fight with Jabbar,
The
with
pagoda.
Kareem, in the pagoda. And then we were going to do Danny Ina Santos, and we were going to do all these different people as
Hmm.
we figured out what the Tower of Death was all about,
Hmm.
which was open to a lot of discussion. And so Bruce looked, and there were two suits. There was a yellow one with black bars,
Uh-huh.
and there was a black one with yellow bars,
Yeah.
right?
Yeah.
So Bruce said, well, I think I'll wear the black one. It'll make me look lean and da 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 da. This is
Yeah.
before we made Enter the Dragon, right? And he said, and then we can have Kareem kick me and put a footprint. It'll look really great. We'll have his big footprint on the black. Sounds good. So the wardrobe man went off, bought a couple of the black ones, kept the yellow one because in those days you didn't get samples. You had to pay for everything.
Mm.
So he had the black ones and he had the yellow ones. And Kareem showed up. We were getting ready to start filming. And Bruce said, and I'm going to have you, Kareem, at a certain point in the fight. You're going to kick me in the chest and I'm going to fall backwards. And then when I stand up, there'll be this big footprint right across my chest. As before we knock the glasses off and he's got the cat's eyes, blah, blah, blah.
Yeah, he's still sitting down. Yeah.
So he says to the wardrobe man, I want to see how big the footprint is. Because it would put it straight, you put it sideways. Because, Bruce wasn't that big. Kareem's feet were
were bigger than Bruce. Yeah.
Kareem's feet were appropriate to the size of Kareem. So the wardrobe man says, well, what kind of dust are you going to have on the floor? Nobody's really thought about things like this. What kind of dust do you want on the floor? Well, we need to have dust on the floor so you can have dust on his foot, so his foot can go like that. So he goes off and he comes back, and he's got white dust, and he's put a big handprint on the black jersey. Bruce and I look at it. That looks like shit. It looks like exactly what it is. It looks weird. It looks like somebody took chalk dust. So this wardrobe man went off mumbling to himself, as wardrobe men do. And about 10 minutes later, he comes back with the yellow one with a gray footprint on it. Bruce says, that's perfect. So the wardrobe man goes off and quickly buys 3 more of the yellows with the black stripes. Puts the black one away. And we reshot the entry shots. So when Kareem arrives, boom, it shows up. Why? Why the yellow? Because it makes for better footprints.
So it's not symbolic of the power to the
Nothing
people.
to do with the yellow man's burden or the black man's burden or the white man's burden. Footprints look better in gray on a yellow than they look in white on a black. Okay? Never forget that, Bruno. That's a very important lesson for you as a stuntman, as a producer, and as a director. Okay? Get your footprint to match the fabric.
If you know that, you're ready to graduate.
Believe me, you're on to Producer School 301.
Oh, nice. I'm a black belt already. That's incredible, man. That's amazing. That's amazing. People see nowadays. People see race and everything, but people see everything and I remember that. That black and white movie. It's called La Haine. That French movie from Vincent Cassel. The actor Vincent Cassel.
Yeah.
He once went to give a lecture to a school, to a film university in Long Beach, I believe, and he was lecturing, and people were asking him, why did he shoot everything? I believe he directed it or something. Why did he shoot Why did he shoot everything black and white? And people started asking him, was it because of any symbolic feature, anything like the rawness of the pictures that you're showing? How tough of a childhood did the character have? And it was like, no, we did not have enough money for shooting in
color footage.
Film. Yeah, that's why. Okay, next question. Everybody was like, oh, it just broke their will, broke their minds. Just to get a little bit of reality. But
the truth of it is, film critics, professors of film history, and generations of graduate students in film have expended a great deal of energy looking for symbolism that really wasn't there.
Yeah.
But it leads me, when as a young student in university, for Asian studies, I had to take a couple of art appreciation classes. And I remember at the time being drilled on all of the symbolism, and when you're studying, versions of Buddhist architecture down through the three dynasties of India, and you got to understand the sway of the hip, the pose. You know what? It comes down to one thing. If you put it in perspective, art is commerce.
Hmm.
Back when they were carving those statues, they got paid by the cubic foot of carving, right?
Yeah.
And I'm quite sure when they did the Sistine Chapel, the Pope called him in and said, "Listen, Leo, we got a big chapel here. This is the budget we got. Now, what can you give us?" And he said, "Well, I can give you 5 colors and I'll give you 2 ounces of gold splash." The Pope said, "Good. Okay. We'll raise the money for that. And if you come up with a design that's better, I'll split any additional funds raised."
Hmm.
That's how you get things done,
Hmm.
right?
Yeah. Hmm.
At the end of the day, as I like to say, and this is got to be my last story because I've got to go. I
Yeah,
stayed an
sure.
hour longer than I planned.
Ah, sorry.
Um, no problem. I used to do a lecture at the propaganda school in Beijing for earnest young propagandists and filmmakers,
Hmm.
and we talked about the the beginnings of the film industry, and the beginnings of the film industry, the beginnings of storytelling. And and truly, if you think about it, right now, if we trace things back, storytelling is probably part of the second oldest profession in the world because the requisites for storytelling and the requisites for prostitution are exactly the same. You need ample number of men, excess disposable income, and leisure time.
Hmm.
Because what we do as storytellers and entertainers is we take and we monetize people's free time. We take some of their money, we entertain them with a story, right?
Yeah,
And
exactly.
they pay us for it. Who are we competing against? The oldest profession in the world.
Yeah.
Same requisites, right?
Yep.
That hasn't changed, and it never will, because you're competing against all of the other alternatives of how to use that free time and that money. So you got to be at the top of your game, or you won't get your share, right?
Yep.
That's the truth of it, and that doesn't change. I used to postulate just to drive them crazy. You know, the oldest hieroglyphic paintings so far found in the known world are in some caves in France, and it's pictures of primitive man chasing woolly mammoths off a cliff, a hunting scene. Now you might ask yourself, why in the cave is there a picture of some guys chasing woolly mammoths off a cliff? And I would suggest to you that it's because at some point, one of those hunter gatherers got really tired of running through the woods, stepping on thistles, chasing woolly mammoths, and hoping they'll run off a cliff. Because even if they run off the cliff and you didn't get gored, then you got to climb down the cliff, chop up the woolly mammoth, and haul it back up to the cave, right?
Yeah.
It's a lot of work. If, on the other hand, you complain you sprained your ankle, you can stay back by the campfire with all the women while everybody else is out chasing the woolly mammoths for 2 weeks. We know
Entertaining them.
what happens when you're by the campfire with the women and the guys are out chasing the woolly mammoths. The problem is they come back, they got big hunks of woolly mammoth, they don't need to give it to you, right?
Yeah.
So you got to find a way to earn your living. So the guy says, "Well, how about if I tell the story about your woolly mammoth hunting? And in fact, I'll animate it. I'll do a drawing. And if you give me a bigger hunk of the woolly mammoth, I'll put you as the guy closest to the mammoth just before it goes off the cliff." And that's how storytelling actually began.
Artistry is business. Art is business.
Artistry meets commerce.
Commerce. Yep.
but it does represent viable and valuable use of free time. But there's always money involved. It's transactional. Storytelling. It's very simple. You're sitting by the fireside telling your story as hard as you can, hoping they'll give you a leg of woolly mammoth to eat. If the guy 2 campfires over has got a better story, goodbye. They
Goodbye.
take their woolly mammoth and they go listen to him, or they throw you in the fire. I mean, it depends on how critics worked in those days, right? That's truly the whole thing. Hold on just a second.
Okay, Andrew.
Hello? Hello? Wait. It's okay. Sorry, Bruno. Anyway, that's the bottom line. I hope I've answered all your questions.
Yes,
I honestly, you can read the way Bob Klaus tells that story in the book. If I'd have known you wanted to ask the story, I'd have got the book out and read you my autographed copy of it, right? But honestly, that story is legend. Everybody has told it.
Mhm.
The version in Klaus's book is about as close as it comes to the reality of it.
Perfect. Because I
Honestly.
like to know that I haven't been reading fake accounts, but I always loved this book, so I'm glad you approve of it entirely.
Well, in fairness to Bob, because he worked for us at Golden Harvest on and off for a number of years, he did give the galleys to Raymond and asked Raymond to comment. And then Raymond gave them to me and asked me to comment. He said, well, look, at the time, I didn't think anybody was actually going to read the book, so it didn't really matter. But the truth is, why would you want to do anything less than tell the truth?
Exactly.
You know, and also because if you look back, there was so much rubbish written about Bruce Lee
Oh yeah. Oh,
in the
phew.
first 5 years after he passed away.
Jesus. Yeah.
You know, I mean, problems with irresponsible fake news and all of that don't start and end in the last 10 years. They've been going on as long as there's been newsprint.
Yep.
It just, we used to have the ability to tell the difference. You know, certain kind of newspapers printed certain kinds of rubbish, and other more upmarket magazines and publications tried to be a bit more responsible. That's before everybody slid into the noise, as
Yeah.
we say.
Sir, thank you so much. Thank you for everything.
Thank
And
you.
yeah, we'll keep in touch. Thank you so much,
All
sir.
right, good luck. I hope
Have
you
a
all
great
stay
day.
safe down there.
You too. Thank you so much and have a great day.
Thanks, my friend.
See
Bye-bye
you
now.
soon. See you soon.